Watch out, let me get a shot. Where they at? Where they at?
On that rooftop. Hey! Give me a fucking 42 in here,
We're east of the riverbed, and we're taking fire from the west. Roger, stand by, we're popping smoke. Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Well, welcome to the podcast. We are blessed today to have a very important guest with us. Colonel Keith Nightingale, U.S. Army retired, was commissioned as second lieutenant in 1965 and served on active duty for nearly 30 years. During that time, he commanded 4 rifle companies, 3 battalions, and 2 brigades, all airborne or ranger units, and some in combat. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, participated in the planning of the Iran rescue attempt, and was an assault force commander in Grenada. He commanded both the 1st Battalion 75th Rangers and the 1st Ranger Training Brigade, and he was an original member of Joint Special Operations Command. He also managed the Department of Defense Interagency Counter-Drug Task Force for Latin America from Panama, which was involved in operations associated with the pursuit of the infamous drug kingpin Pablo Escobar. Colonel Nightingale earned numerous awards for valor in combat, was also inducted in the Ranger Hall of Fame. He is a prolific author and is considered a subject matter expert on the training and development of combat leaders. We are truly blessed to have him with us today. Colonel Nightingale, welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast.
Happy to be here. You know, something for us now in splendid isolation to do something useful for the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Rather than just worry about toilet paper and paper towels.
Absolutely. Where are you located geographically?
I am in a town called Ojai, California, which is very near Santa Barbara. I'm actually we have a ranch we've had since 1886, living on the edge of the Los Padres National Forest. So social distancing is not an issue.
There you go. Well, before we get going, I think you've got a very unique background. And I'm going to offer you the opportunity to tell people any tidbits about you that I didn't mention in the intro. Anything we need to know about Colonel Keith Nightingale that might spark our interest?
No, you covered my history pretty well. The family history is that virtually every male in our family from the Pilgrims literally has served in the military in one form or another in every war we've ever had. So my going into the Army was sort of a family tradition as opposed to an aberrant act.
Nice, nice. Well, before we get into the meat of it, I wanted to see if you could boil down, obviously, as you know, Colonel, the podcast, appropriately named Combat Leadership Podcast, it is aimed at aspiring combat leaders, small unit leaders, those most prone to have to fix bayonets during a combat engagement. So we're talking to Lance Corporals, young corporals, sergeants, brand new lieutenants, ROTC students. And if we do this right, this will be out on the internet forever. So some people aren't even born yet are going to listen to your words one day. If you had to boil it down into 2 or 3 sentences, what's your philosophy on combat leadership?
Well, number one, the only thing that really counts in combat are squads and platoons. You can invade Normandy with 140,000 people, but it's the squads that are going to determine the actual outcome. We spend most of our time reading books and writing about the great generals and the leadership, but the truth is what they generaled was a whole amalgamation of squads that, for whatever reason, were successful. I've been a great believer that the most important core capability of any maneuver unit is the squads and platoons. When you get above company level, it's echelons of management and support. So you've got to really focus your time on the small units, which are not sexy. And if you look at discretionary time on training calendars, they kind of get the second tier of availability, when in truth, they really need to get the first. And of course, the small unit leaders are the least experienced, but also the most important. They're the linchpin of success. And that level of leadership, and I would say that's from the team leader up through the company commander, is really the crucial part of any competent combat organization.
Yeah, I totally agree with your comments. And while you were an Army officer and I was in the Marine Corps, enlisted and officer, I can tell you your words echo exactly what I've been taught. I had a battalion commander one time. His name was Ray Smith. He actually retired as a major general, but he was
I know him well.
Yeah, a very accomplished
that's
combat
E.
leader.
Smith.
It is, yes. So
Navy, I know him well. I relieved him in Grenada.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, you tell me, because I was in his unit.
I was just going to say that he was at Pearls and Carriacou Island, and I flew in and we walked around a while to do the relief so he could get back on his ship and go to Lebanon. And his sergeant major found the only cold Heinekens on the entire island. And we sat on a sand dune and worked the transition of the troops and all, drinking the sergeant major's miraculous discovery. So, yeah, I know him, and of course, also from Hue.
Right. He was a fantastic leader. I was one of his lieutenants. I was a rifle platoon in that battalion, Fox Company 2-8. And I remember early on, before we left on deployment, I didn't really know who he was, or I was the battalion commander. That was good enough for me. But I started picking up that he was a bit of a famous character in the Marine Corps, and highly decorated, Navy Cross, a couple Silver Stars. And I think his early claim to fame was he was a second lieutenant that took over a rifle company in Hue City when his company commander got very seriously wounded. And I can remember him. I was an enlisted Marine, and this was really music to my ears. I mean, I have a lot of faith in the NCOs, as I'm sure you do. But he literally was teaching his officers that the most important leader in this battalion, and in fact, the division, he said, was the squad leader. And he kept emphasizing that all of his experience was that when things go to hell in a handbasket, and they will, there's not enough captains and lieutenants and staff sergeants and gunnery sergeants to go around. It is, in fact, the squad leader. So he literally told us, you will be losing your squad leaders because I'm going to send a whole bunch of them, if not all of them, to squad leader school. And we're getting ready to do some major exercises without them. So make it happen, but we're sending these young soldiers and Marines to school. And that resonated with me. I never forgot that. And so it seems like he and you are on the same sheet of music as far as the value and the absolute critical importance of the squad leader. He was all about platoons and below.
This is something I learned as a second lieutenant in the 82nd. We had a lot of vets at that time, 65. We had a lot of old vets that would come back, and old vets are ranging from like Gavin and Ridgway down to ex-PFC, Schmuckatelli, et cetera, 3-4 jump combat jump wings. And they all said the same thing independently. So, I'd never been to combat before, and I read about, great leadership and all that, but I didn't really understand it. They focused it. And then I got into it, with my own platoon. I actually had 3 platoons because I was the only platoon leader in the company. And so I had a lot of platoon sergeants trying to make me smart. They all said the same thing, and they all had combat experience. They were 82nd World War II vets or Korean War vets. They'd all been shot at seriously. And I deployed, my very first combat actually was to Dominican Republic. And, I was totally clueless. What are we doing now? So I just watched the sergeants and, they basically did all the work. And then that was just reinforced further when I went to Vietnam, and you could see it literally. You were not going to succeed as an officer unless the NCOs below you were able to succeed. It was that simple.
Understood. A lot of the younger folks out there that are going to be listening to this, Colonel, are going to wonder, if it's the age-old question, am I going to measure up? And before we attack that one, do you believe that that anyone can be, with the desire, can be made into or developed into at least an effective combat leader?
Well, maybe. The first thing a combat leader has to do is understand what succeeds and what does not. He's got to be up there to see and smell and make analysis to what really needs to be done. He can't do this from a distant CP or from a helicopter at 2,000 feet. He's got to be down there to smell and feel, because the troops aren't going to do what he wants unless they understand he's up there with them and part of the equation. He's got to be very human in that regard. He's got to display, regardless of his personal fears, he's got to display confidence to the troops, particularly to his immediate leadership. He has to be decisive. Even if it's a bad decision, it's a decision they can move out and sort it out later. But he's got to have the confidence to actually tell them to do something and be there with them when they do it. And he's got to be, we say tactically and technically proficient. He's got to know what he's got to help them. No soldier is worth all, rephrase that. There is no ordnance that we have, no airframes, no helicopters, no rockets, no drones that are anywhere near as valuable as the lowest ranking PFC in the squad. Anything you can throw at the bad guys before you put a soldier at risk, a soldier or Marine, a grunt at risk, and that's an interchangeable term for both services, the grunt. Anything you can do to help him out before you send him forward is what a leader needs to do and be able to do competently. If he shows up on the battlefield and he's clueless, as to how a copperhead works or how to call in CAS, he's worthless. So he's got to know his skill set, and he's got to be prepared to employ it and understand that a grunt is the sword of last resort here.
Yeah.
So that's a long answer to your question, but basically anybody could be a combat leader that's capable of doing what I just described.
No, I understood. I do want to dovetail on something you said as far as throwing anything you have at the enemy. Well, this must have been around the time you were in Vietnam as a young lieutenant. There was a Marine general there named Ray Davis. Ray Davis was a World War II and Korea Marine. I believe he received the Navy Cross for World War II and a Medal of Honor in the Chosin Reservoir fight in Korea. And when I went through infantry officer advanced course at Fort Benning. Back then, the Marine Corps used to send about 12 officers a year, 2 or 3 per class. And I really wanted to go to Benning because it had a reputation as being the better tactical school for captains. So I went there, and we hosted, the Marine liaison, Lieutenant Colonel there, hosted General Davis there to speak to all of Fort Benning. The building 2 or whatever the theater was, it was packed. And he shows up in his dress uniform, still looking fit, well into his 70s. But we went to lunch with him privately before that. And he was he knew Chesty Puller. He was Chesty Puller's, XO. We were asking him, it was just about 5 of us there. And he started talking about Vietnam. And this is a relevant story. It's why I'm going to hog a little bit of the time here. he said early of taking over the division, he would hear about a battalion getting in a big fight. He said, I wouldn't bother them. After the smoke would clear in an appropriate amount of time, he'd fly in and he'd get the colonel, the battalion commander, say, well, tell me what happened. And then after a while, he'd say, how did the artillery battalions do for you? How did close air support work for you? And he said, unfortunately, the first several times he did this, the battalion commanders had no answer for him because they had not used artillery and they had not used close air support. And he said, when he started getting those answers, he started saying, Colonel, get on the helicopter with me. XO, you're now the commanding officer. And the word got out I think he said he did this 8 times in short order. And the word got out, before you send Marines up that hill against fortified positions, you had best send a hell of a lot of artillery and napalm or whatever, but you will not sacrifice more grunts without combined arms. And he said the effect that had was obviously it saved Marines and killed a lot of the enemy before Marines had to get close quarters with him. But he said it wasn't long before the colonels would grab him and say, glad you're here, General. Let me tell you about what he did. We did a hell of a prep fire. They were all over combined arms now. So he said it was a shame that had to happen, but he had to kick ass and relieve 8 battalion commanders within about a month.
That is the real world and what I learned in a hurry in Vietnam. Totally untrained. Fort Benning, they would take you to an artillery demonstration and show what it could do. But you didn't get a radio and start calling this stuff in or plan it. That was totally skipped. In Vietnam, it was a survival situation, and you were, in my case, I was an advisor, quote unquote, which really meant I was the fire support officer.
Yeah.
Because anything the U.S. could bring is what I advised. And I learned in a hurry that you could mix helicopter gunships, tactical air, artillery, and mortars. You could put all 4 of them in on an LZ while you're bringing in the lift helicopters if you do it smart. And if you don't do it smart, you get people killed. And if you don't know how to bring that stuff in when you're in deep kimchi, you're going to get a lot of people killed. Yeah. So you kind of learn in a hurry. And I think it's probably not something that's really covered enough in the schools these days, simply because it's complicated and expensive and it's inter-service. You got, the blue suiters up above and you got the gray suiters down below and you got the cannon cockers to the rear. It's hard to get them all together, but boy, it is important. I saw that in Afghanistan. The same thing. You had to be able to very selectively use the right ordnance. Anything to distance a troop from the bad guys.
Right.
No long answer. I'm sorry.
Timeless lessons. Very important for the young folks to hear that, because they have ordnance that you and I could have only dreamed about in our day, ordnance and weapon systems and platforms and all of that. But the need to send metal downrange in some cases before they send Marines and soldiers down there is every bit as important.
Yeah.
Actually,
I think there's been an evolution now because of communications. A squad leader can do everything in terms of collecting this stuff that a battalion commander was only able to do in Vietnam.
Yeah, agreed.
And, how do you train Sergeant Schmuck to use all this stuff? Hard to do, but Schmuck needs to know what's out there and how to use it and how you do a prep fire, call for fires, mass fires, all that kind of good stuff. Because someday in some dark place, he may be the only thing between, defeat and victory by being able to bring that kind of stuff in. You don't know, particularly on a peer-on-peer conflict as we're talking about now.
Yeah, well, no doubt about that. which goes back to our earlier discussion about the primacy and critical nature of the NCO. The sergeant has all these systems now, but they are, I was going to say worthless. They're not worthless, but they are potentially deadly in the wrong sense if that sergeant isn't mature, isn't trained, doesn't have sound judgment because of the lethality that he can bring in, which in the past usually was only at the fingertips of someone maybe 15 or 20 years older than him. So it's a big deal. It just speaks to how much we need to train young NCOs.
Yeah, and part of that is mental. There was a retired 82nd vet that would come back quite frequently to my unit, the 2505. And he would talk about this in the 505 during World War II. And he's, we were talking about leadership, what's a platoon leader do and all that. And he said, well, the key thing that General Gavin taught us was screw it, do it. Don't worry about what's happening in the rear or what may be available. Just do whatever you think the right answer is. And, the old, seek forgiveness rather than permission approach.
Yeah.
The key issue is decisiveness. The squad leader, the team leader has got to have the self-confidence where they're just prepared to do whatever they think needs to be done at the moment. And if it's bad, they can sort it out, but at least something good may happen.
No doubt about it. Some advice to the young folks, Colonel. The wars in Afghanistan, Iraq have largely wound down. I don't want to discredit. We still do have troops over there that are engaged and sometimes heavily engaged. We've got people in Syria. We've got people in some far off places of the world. But for the most part, today's junior leaders and the upcoming ones that aren't even commissioned or enlisted yet, they're going to get a chance to be peacetime leaders before being combat leaders. And there's an age-old debate. I've had guests on this show tell me that they don't believe there's anything such as combat leadership. They just think it's regular military leadership in a combat environment. And they give good reasons for that and good rationale. And then there's others that say, no, there's actually quite a bit of difference. I'd like to have you share your thoughts with the audience, the difference and the applicability, the transferability of garrison leadership. You're a platoon leader in the 82nd, so to speak, right now. And 11 months from now, you're deployed and you're in combat now. How much does that platoon leader have to change relative to his leadership style from Fort Bragg to now Afghanistan or Timbuktu, wherever he's at?
Well, I think when you're in garrison, there's two issues you have to deal with. One of them is what I would call combat training focus, and the other is management. The management stuff is, is the unit SOP being followed? Do we have a policy written? Are the orders being cut? How are we doing on the IG, that sort of stuff, which is irrelevant to how you're going to do in combat. A good battalion brigade commander is going to emphasize the discretionary time for the other side, which is the combat training, combat leadership stuff. It's the PT, it's the marksmanship, it's the small unit training, it's the sand tables or PDs that may go on, and it's actually getting out in the field and doing something separate and distinct from what I would call the management aspects of garrison. Unfortunately, the management side usually eats up a good 75% of the available time, which leaves only 25% for what's really important. I will say that you don't suddenly get good when you go to war. You fight as you train. If you're a sloppy, poor, disciplined, incompetent organization in garrison, you'll be exactly that in the field. Only combat is going to force changes to mentality and methodology to make you good. So what you want to do is try to get as good as you can, less bullets, when you're in garrison. So you got to structure what little discretionary time you have to what's really important for combat training and combat leadership.
Yeah, excellent. You brought us naturally right into the next topic, which is discipline. And you have such a broad career, such a broad field of view, so to speak. And you said something I just listened to, and I want you to go back to it. You just don't suddenly become disciplined or competent in combat. I call that the combat genie. There's no combat genie that hits the unit on the head with a wand, and now all the stuff you're supposed to be doing is magically in there now that you're deployed. It doesn't work that way. Well, I know you've got such credibility, experience. I'd like you to maybe expand upon that a little bit, because we all know the tendency for the garrison stuff to outweigh the tactical training and raw MOS competent that's going to allow people to win in combat. That, unfortunately, is the tendency in all services, to let the parade ground stuff dominate. What do you think about that as far as, and so a lot of young leaders sometimes, I think, don't really understand the discipline aspect of it and the need for, like, is there any purpose behind inspections and uniform regulations and the first sergeant insisting on personal appearance? Some people just dismiss those totally as chicken shit, whereas others say, no, it may be a pain in the ass, and I don't even like doing it myself, but it develops some things that do have a payoff in combat. So I'd like you to talk to our young folks about that.
Well, it's a balance. There are several things that are really important in a unit that, if they're not presented well, are viewed as chicken shit, but in fact are very important to the core competency. The first is a set of standards. What does a soldier look like? What does the room he's in look like? How does his rucksack get packed? What are the standards for appearance? Is everybody in A, B, and C mode doing the same thing, or is everybody looking the same and dressed the same that are doing the same thing? The key is that there has to be a uniform set of standards for virtually everything the organization does. That's the standard everybody is graded on. It's not on polishing the rocks or, painting the flagpole. That's not important. What's important is the soldier stuff. PT is very important within limits. You don't want to run the soldier to death, but you say, okay, the standard is 5 miles in 40 minutes. You don't do it in 41 minutes. You don't do it in 39 minutes. You do it in 40 minutes. The soldier understands that. That is mental discipline. Road marches, everybody hates them, but boy, they're really valuable for mental toughness. In the Rangers, we did road marches, and I hated them. If you can imagine a full ruck in Fort Stewart, Georgia in August, you get the picture. But I can tell you that I never had a greater degree of stress than on that road march that I had in Vietnam. The road marches, that's important. PT is important if done uniformly, and you don't have an aberrant set of standards or a particular hot rock that wants to run a squad into the ground. Weapons maintenance, nothing more important than that. Soldier ought to be able to do that in his sleep. If the troops look good and they act good, they're going to be good. There's a mental transfer that takes place between what you did at Fort Fumble and what you did on the wild frontier. It is important. You have to draw the line as to what is not important. Cleaning the grease trap with a toothbrush is not important.
Yeah.
However, having a room that looks squared away according to the unit standard is, because again, it's transferred to each soldier and each organization's mental makeup. So instead of at Fort Fumble, they're now organizing themselves in Fallujah, and they do it the same way. They understand each other and they understand the standard. This is how you cross the street. This is how you do Overwatch. And this is all stuff they learned in garrison without bullets. And, you know, that's, I don't know, that's quite answering your question, but, you know, it's, you have to, I'll give you an example of what was really important for us in the Rangers. A rucksack SOP. What goes in the lower left pocket? Every single company had the same stuff in the lower left pocket. Who's responsible? The squad leader. That is something for him to check and ensure and maintain. And it does two things. First of all, it teaches the soldier what the standard is on loading a rucksack. The second thing is it teaches the squad leader how to inspect and check. And the soldier understands if the squad leader says, what's in your lower left pocket, it better be exactly what the standard is. And that transfers itself not only into, call it competency, but also into a sense of organizational pride. You know, the unit, the soldiers know when they're good and when they're bad. Believe me, they understand bullshit and they understand good. And if they look good and they know they're organized and they're cohesive, they're going to be good. Give them any mission you want to, they're going to figure out how to do it in a competent manner. And it's all part of the mental discipline, which is really as important as any field tactical discipline they may have to do.
Agreed. And you know, you actually jumped on that. My next question was going to be, excuse me, was going to be, is there utility and value in requiring grunts, Marine soldiers, whatever, to have their first aid kit all located in the same spot on their gear? The radio men have a spare handset. Where is that handset carried?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where is the crypto? And that's where the young troops rebel. Like, what does it matter if I wear my bayonet on the left side or the right side? So I'd like you to talk a little bit about
that. I can't tell you how extraordinarily important that is. You never know where you're going to be or who you're going to be with when the stuff really gets binding. If there is a rucksack that you grab and you need something immediately to provide a combat aid packet, you need to know where to go in that ruck. You don't have the time to throw it all out and sort it out. It better be in the lower left pocket. If that's that way for everybody, then you're good to go in combat, because regardless of how mixed up stuff gets, you're going to have an asset there that you can deal with. Let me transfer that to mortars. I was big on mortars because that's what my vets told me was really important. It's the only real asset an infantry unit has when it goes to war. Well, we had unit SOPs so that each mortar pit was exactly the same across all three companies. And, you know, you lifted the box off on the left, this is where the spare charges went. You lifted the box off the right, that's where the fuse wrenches were and the other stuff. Well, the point was, if you suddenly had a mortar section taken out, you had to grab a couple guys from Company B and put them in the A pit. They need to know how to fire in the A pit right away. And once they figured, hey, it's all the same, you know, it's just different people doing it, but they know exactly where it is, you know, forecast that to the middle of the night under fire, where you don't have the luxury of discussing stuff. You just grab a guy and say, you're now the gunner. He needs to know where all the stuff is in the gun pit. And it's the same thing with the rucksacks. We had very detailed rucksack SOPs. And, you know, depending on what the unit or mission was, your MOS, it was packed this way or that way. But I can tell you the two most important things were, where is the ammunition and where is the medical stuff? Those two things were really important. You didn't want to have to, in the middle of the night under fire, fumble around through a ruck. You could feel a ruck, go to the pocket and pull it out, and you had what you needed. And that transfers in a lot of ways, like, again, back to the mental conditioning and actually the sense of self-confidence. If I'm a troop in A company and the only truck that shows up is B company rucks, it's okay. I can deal with that. I know where all the stuff is.
Absolutely. Let's talk about a little bit of the mental aspect right now, specifically fear and uncertainty. We mentioned it earlier, I did, Colonel, the age-old question that I know you asked yourself, you know, when my time comes in combat, you know, when I'm finally there and I hear my first bullet, you know, shot fired in anger, will I do okay? And I think that most young troopers, you know, in a combat arms organization, that, you know, combat experience is valued currency. And so I think they're no different than you were, than I was. They don't want to die, but they want to test themselves. But they have that question inside. When my time comes, will I be able to do it? Not really necessarily afraid of dying, but I'm afraid of failing my comrades. What do you tell, if you were sitting in front of an audience of young NCOs or ROTC students or newly commissioned lieutenants, what do you tell them about that question?
Yes, just pull the trigger. What you're going to do, your training kicks in under the most difficult circumstances. Advisor. One of my very first encounters was we were in War Zone D, kind of dense jungle, and all of a sudden the guy up in front of me is firing with his AK. It was clearly an AK. They sound a lot different than an M16. I just literally pulled up my M16, put it on the 3-round burst, and fired back. From then on, it was easy. You know, the training will kick in. You will do it's really important that the unit act as a unit. You know, the SLA Marshall issue about, you know, well, only 20% of the troops ever fired their rifle. I had no experience that way. It was quite the opposite. General Gavin and Ridgway said that certainly didn't apply in the 82nd. You know, every soldier that was in combat that I saw was firing his rifle. And in a sense, that gave them a sense of cohesion and togetherness, where just the act of doing something kicked in that training. So you don't think about it. The worst thing that can happen in combat is you worry about something. Never worry about anything. Just focus on what it is you're supposed to do, and the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah.
Life is luck and timing, and there's absolutely nothing you can do in combat that's going to prevent you from getting killed or not killed unless you do something stuck on stupid. Yeah. Other than that, just do your job and the rest will take care of itself.
This is a broad-ranging question, Colonel, and, you know, Clausewitz talked about what's called the fog of war. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. We could talk on it. It could be a whole separate podcast episode, but, you know, I'm sure you're going to say the fog of war is real, but you're talking to untested leaders right now. What do you tell them about fog of war and how to deal with it?
Well, fog of war's got a couple of different levels to it. The first is call it the senior leadership level. The brigade commander doesn't really understand what's going down with the 1st Battalion. The 1st Battalion commander doesn't really understand what's going on in A Company. And then the A Company commander doesn't understand what's happening in 1st Platoon, because you can't see exactly what's going on. You can't sense it. You only got your records and reports. At the grunt level, I can speak from personal experience. The fog of war is whatever's going on to the left and the right of you more than 5 feet away. It's in this one particular case, we were basically completely overrun. And I only knew what was taking place in the very narrow fan of my vision. The sound is incredible. You don't hear anything left or right. And it was only after the combat, and we all could kind of get together and talk about what we did. It was, wow, 20 feet off to the right, this was happening. And I was totally clueless. That's the fog of war. The thing that clears the fog of war is after the battle, but during the action, you just do what you have to do within the constraints of the organization. The squad, the fire team, the platoon. The fog of war is not important for anybody but people after the action. Yeah. The fog of war is irrelevant for the people that are involved, because there's no fog where they're at. They know what they got to do, and they got to do it. And if they do it, the rest will take care of itself. The fog of war is ignorance of operations and action, which is a natural outcome of confusion in combat. Nobody can see 100% of the people they're responsible for. They only know what they heard or they saw, nothing else.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I want to transition to something that might be more of the fog of war on the company and platoon and squad level, and that's what we call Murphy's Law. In other words, right at the time you were getting run, Murphy's Law said that's right the time your radio shit the bed.
If it can go bad, it will.
Yeah, exactly. Your machine gun jams and all of that. I think young leaders who haven't tasted that before need to know, first of all, it's going to happen. And secondly, what do you do when you're faced with one of the biggest, situations of your life and your radio's out?
Yeah.
What now, Lieutenant?
You do what you can do with what you have to do it. Don't worry about that stuff. It will happen. You have to figure out on the spot what you're going to do anyway. Your radio doesn't work. This doesn't work. Joe's not there. The plane didn't show up. Okay, press on. You don't have a choice. You don't get to vote no. You just have to work your way through it and believe that somewhere up above or to your left and right, people will kind of sort it out and come to your help. But you can't freeze. You've got to move forward. You've got to do what needs to be done with what you got. Murphy's Law always prevails. I've had more Murphy's Law than non-law in my experience.
Yeah.
So you just got to deal with it. It's going to happen. Forget it. Move on.
I think part of dealing with Murphy's Law, what you're leading us into is the topic of mental toughness, mental resilience, the refuse to lose mentality that I know that you saw in spades in your paratrooper units and in the Ranger battalions. I mean, these are guys that pride themselves on being able to push further and faster than other units under similar conditions and all of that. How important is mental toughness to a combat leader, and how does he develop it in himself and his unit?
I want to take your question back to the previous issue. Murphy's Law. It's really important that whoever the leader on the spot is not say, well, gee, this didn't work, therefore I can't do anything. That's part of the mental toughness and the will to win going forward. Yeah, I didn't get this, or that didn't happen, or it was a total soup sandwich. But you're there, you got to do something. You can't say, well, gee, they didn't have this, therefore we got to kind of hold in place and wait and do nothing. That's not how it works. You got to just suck it up and move out. The that's part of the mental toughness, will to win, that you asked about. And the only way that happens is you just have to have a mindset where, hey, we're here and failure is not an option. We're going to have to suck it up and do it. Going back to a little history, Colonel Otway, who had the mission to take out the Merville battery in Normandy. Crucial battery, had to be done, strategic objective. They devoted 10% of the total forces of the 6th Airborne Division to that particular task under him. And he was supposed to have about 800 people assembled at about 1:30 in the evening, morning of D-Day. He had a total of 125. And the XO says, well, what do we do now? We're supposed to move out. And Otway said, well, failure is not an option, so we're going to go with what we got, and moved out. And he, by a miracle and a lot of casualties, took the objective. But he did that under circumstances that most people would say were impossible, can't do it. You got to quit or stop or, wait a while. That's the mental toughness piece. It's going that extra mile, what the road march does to your mind.
Yeah.
If I can do this, I can do anything. It's like going to Ranger School. If you can go to Ranger School and get the tab, you can probably do damn near anything the military is going to throw at you. So it's a mindset, and you only develop that mindset by just working hard, taking yourself to whatever you think your limits are, and then just kind of pushing over the line and discovering you got new limits.
Yep.
Understand you're responsible for troops. You are, whether you're a team leader, a squad leader, a platoon leader, or battalion commander, everybody underneath you is depending upon you. So you better come up with something and do something. You can't do nothing, and just do it.
Understood. I want to talk a little bit about physical training. We've already discussed it a little bit. I know you've got some good thoughts on this. I believe when you first came in the Army, Colonel, most of the physical training was probably boots and utility runs,
right,
road marches. And then post-Vietnam, the running boom hit. And it hit the Marine Corps and the Army. And all of a sudden, you had the silk short-wearing gazelles out there. And all of a sudden, if you were a marathon runner, in some people's eyes, you were not going to be a good combat soldier. So I'm pointing this out to say that, we actually did pretty well as a nation in war before running shoes were invented. And left to their own devices, some leaders will go overboard and eccentric and take their units in a physical training sense into dangerous, if not just useless, non-applicable kind of activities. I'd like to get your thought on that. I know physical training, first of all, gets you healthy, gets you fit and all of that. But a lot of the young folks chafe at that, and they really wonder because they're hearing old timers say, well, we never PT'd in combat and all of that. Maybe so, but I don't think anyone in serious combat will ever say that the ability to handle fatigue and high heat and dehydration and lack of food and all of that comes from physical readiness combined with mental toughness. I'd like to hear your thoughts on physical training.
First of all, I agree with you in regard to the running. I think it was overemphasized so that the sine qua non of leadership was how fast you could run a mile, which is kind of irrelevant in combat because we don't chase after the enemy quite that fast. I do think physical fitness is very important, however, for both mental and physical endurance. The aerobics is important because it gets your heart and your system working. So when you are under stress, you can deal with it. You've got to be in physical condition to go long periods without sleep. to move far, to carry heavy loads. I think actually a 5-mile rucksack march is a lot more valuable than a 5-mile run. You need the 5-mile runs to get your core working, but you need that rucksack move to build endurance and the lower leg strength in your back, and just how do you handle a loaded ruck and still arrive competent at the other end. That's really important. The other stuff, the speed running, I think is significantly less important. Sleep deprivation, we touched on that. I am a big believer in forced sleep discipline. You know, the commander that tries to stay awake for the entire 3-day exercise. Mm-hmm. You know, he's a goon and worthless at the end of the period. So he needs to carve out some time to bag out, and the people around him need to make sure he does the same thing. The same thing with the crucial staff and the subordinate leadership. One of the things we did at the platoon level is we went into NDPs. We would have between the squad leaders, the platoon leader, and the platoon sergeant. If you did 1 hour apiece on the awake, alert leadership while everybody else was sleeping, everybody ended up with 4 or 5 hours of good sleep. If you said, well, okay, first squad, you got it tonight, and first squad's got to stay up the entire night, that's ridiculous. Yeah. You know, it ain't the way it's going to work. But going back to the physical fitness thing, I think it needs to be focused. There's value in agility drills, in some upper body work, but for troops, it's more important, I think, from the waist down. If you look at Afghanistan, you know, you're climbing a hill at 8,000 feet. Yeah. You better be able to climb and arrive at the top of the hill capable of doing something. So, you know, it's a balance, but it needs to be focused and stuff that's worthwhile. Swimming is valuable, not only for aerobics, but also for self-confidence. You know, you never know when you're going to run into a river or your boat swamps. You've got to have the confidence to believe that you can survive. But that's just, you know, a whole mix of things. Yeah. But it needs to be non-repetitive every day. The troop can't wake up and say, I'm going to do on Monday and Friday what I did Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Yeah. And I would also say that intramural athletics is really important. One of the things that I learned from both Gavin and Ridgway is that they spent a lot of time in England before the invasion on intramural athletics, baseball, flag football, basketball, and we're getting ready to invade Normandy, and we're going to spend a lot of time playing baseball. Said, yeah, what they would do is they'd take mixed guys from all the units and suddenly put them together and say, you're now the baseball team. Learn how to play it. And it was a unit cohesion thing where you get 2 guys from the 08, 2 guys from the 07, 4 guys from the 05, and suddenly they have to be a baseball team. So they have to sort it out. And he said that was incredibly valuable later when you had misdrop troops and, you know, people wandering around. You had the 101st and the 82nd blundering into each other and making pickup platoons and companies. But it also adds just a little extra pizzazz, if you would, to the, you know, the physical side of the house. Yeah. But all of that together is really important. Agreed.
You know, I know you're aware of this, that the facilities that are available to young soldiers and Marines and, you know, combat troops today greatly exceed what was available in our day. And the physical training programs that are available are actually pretty good as well. The danger that I'm hearing about this is because there's such an emphasis on sprinting and CrossFit and weight training and various types of things, that you end up the danger of building a really great athlete, but not necessarily a well-conditioned soldier.
Correct.
And if we go that the gold standard is always going to be strap your gear on and go for days and nights on end in a combat environment for real, I'd like to hear your thoughts more about road marching. I've talked to several people that I've interviewed. We always go back to that. Any grunt with any experience. I mean, I'd rather run 5 miles than road march 5 miles. It's just tough. It's hard. And while it's kicking my ass physically, it's really taken me to some dark places early on when I'm on condition, young kid. It's taken me beyond my comfort zone mentally. And I think there's a reason why elite forces around the world typically include prolonged land navigation and road marches in their selection process, because it's foot in front of each foot, and it gives you time to think about quitting or not. And long story that I'm saying here, but what I'm getting at, Colonel, is I'd like to hear your thoughts and advice to the young leaders. If I was a company commander today, or a platoon leader, or a staff NCO, and I was on a accelerator, I'm going to deploy 6 months, I'm 6 weeks from now, and I've got 6 PT sessions left, I'm probably going to do 6 field athletic type, like road marches and things like that, vice unit runs. I don't think there's anything that's been invented yet that's tougher physically, that has the mental side effects of road marching. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I want to integrate that with the previous question. We're talking about physical training and road marches, physical training. I'm a big believer in anything that has to be done collectively rather than individually is of value, like a squad leader, squads going through an obstacle course, or 2 guys going through a course of something, where you have to have dependency with both in order to succeed. That's great physical training, but it's also great organizational training. And it goes back now to the segueing into the road march. Road march is the most horrible, painful experience that God ever invented, but boy, is it valuable on a variety of bases. One is it teaches people how to properly load and wear a rucksack, which is really important if you go to war in most cases. You only have to walk about 100 yards, or road march 100 yards, to know the rucksack is not fitting quite right, or the load's not quite where it ought to be. So you learn in a hurry to do that right. Then you do it within the organization. The squad leader's got to make sure the troops are squared away. The troops got to square each other away. And then you just got to put your mind in neutral and put your one foot in front of the other and move out. But you have to do it in a disciplined manner. You road march at a particular pace, because that's the pace you're going to have to go to get wherever it is you need to go. In the Army, it's about 3.5 miles an hour. The Rangers and the Airborne will push it up to 5 miles simply for the effect. The thing that road marches give you above all else is mental toughness. 5 miles is not a big deal. Most anybody can do that. 10 miles, you're starting to press people, and it's starting to feel bad. Between 10 and 15 miles, it is a huge mental leap. How am I going to do this? Every part of my body hurts, but you can't quit because the rest of the organization is moving forward too. You got a squad leader poking you. Hey, Jones, keep it up here. Close up, let's go. You go to 25 miles, and it is a superhuman leap into where you thought you could be or where you wanted to be. And you are absolutely incredibly exhausted at the end of it, and you can hardly stand up. Your legs are shaking. But you did it. And man, it makes a big mental difference to you. you know, you guys do the 25-mile road march at Stewart? Yeah, man, we got it kicked our ass. But any one of those troops would go 100 miles in any other environment because of what they did with the 25.
Yeah, agreed. I'd like to switch tracks a little bit, Colonel, and talk about the effects, new combat leaders, the effects of casualties. I'm not sure even today we do that great of a job of preparing any soldier or Marine or ground combat person for that matter. You're going to go, you're going to fight. I'm not sure we prepare them to see what you've seen, literally, their friends quite literally torn apart, enemy casualties, unfortunate civilian casualties that were killed by us unintentionally, or in some cases intentionally by a very brutal enemy. Anything you can say to these young folks about how you think casualties are going to affect them and what they can do to prepare for it and keep the momentum going, fights freezing up?
Yeah, on several levels. First of all, you have to be, if you are a troop or a leader in combat, you're going to see people killed and wounded. They're going to be your friends. The last thing that you can afford to do is freeze up. You have to understand that at those mortal moments, you've got to keep doing what you're supposed to be doing in order to keep more casualties from occurring. You can't freeze. Yeah, it's bad, but you got to put it out of your mind for that moment and move forward. That's the only thing you can do. If you freeze, you're screwing everybody else. So, you know, you have to just allow yourself to do that. And the only way you do it is just to do it. You know, you can't train for that. It's just going to happen. The other thing I would say is that friendly casualties make a disciplined unit. In the A-Shao, if we got a couple of guys wounded and maybe one killed in a week, everybody was alert, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Nobody was asleep on the OP, and they moved exactly the way they were supposed to be. You move them for a week, and there's no contact whatsoever. They start getting a little sloppy, a little lazy. They kind of take a break here and there. Well, yeah, I got a couple Z's out here. So, you know, it's a two-way street. You know, the casualties are bad, but in a sense, you know, from just a pure military sense, there is value in having some casualties. That's a little harsh, but it's true. When you lose somebody that's really significant, you know, like this was the greatest squad leader in the battalion. You know, God, Lieutenant Schmuck was just, there was nobody better than him. It gives you a resolve. You know, we're going to get the mothers. You know, I'm not going to allow this to affect us in a negative way. We're going to take what his legacy and we're going to go forward, and, you know, we're really going to smoke these guys. I think that's really the only way you can handle friendly casualties. Enemy casualties, they're just the junk of the battlefield. You don't pay any attention to them. You know, it's the positive consequence of your presence there and what you did. Civilians are a different thing. That's always heartbreaking to see civilians. If you've killed them, it's really bad. If the bad guys kill them, it gives you the resolve to get more bad guys. And I saw a lot of that during TET, where the NVA just intentionally rounded up women and children and killed them because they were associated with the South. They just leave them in big piles and down an alleyway. And you could tell they all been executed. And all it did is it really pissed us off. And, you know, we got, you know, it was one of those no quarter situations. which is common in all wars based on discussions I've had with people that were in both Vietnam and in World War II and Korea. If the bad guys start inflicting civilian casualties, there are not going to be a whole lot of POWs that are captured. If we inflict the civilian casualties, we need to immediately figure out why that occurred. And sometimes you can't help it. I threw the grenade in the room because the bad guy was in there. It just happened to be a woman and a kid were in there also.
Yeah.
You just got to work past that.
Yeah.
Shit happens.
Yeah, agreed. A natural topic to touch on that. It's not in our outline, but I wanted to touch on it. I mean, you're talking about the inadvertent killing of casualties and all that. And one thing I think that the military does good nowadays is it really does school up our young leaders and young soldiers and Marines, even the snuffies, so to speak, the frontliner guys, on the rules of law warfare. We don't shoot civilians. We don't massacre people. We don't take prisoners and execute them and all of that. I don't think we've had serious problems with that in the recent wars, but you come from a place, Vietnam and all that, where we had some of that from all of the ground forces that were involved, Marines, Army, and all of that. And it was hammered into my head. By the time I was an officer, you were a lieutenant colonel and a colonel. Guys of your rank and tenure hammered it into people like me that we do not do that. We really don't do it. I mean, some rules are kind of bullshit, but these rules, we don't do My Lai massacres. We don't take people out back. We don't do it. But don't think for 1 minute that you and your troops aren't capable of doing something like that under the right circumstances of stress and booby traps and, seeing one of your guys get captured and executed. I'd like you to just talk a little bit about the importance of the rules of warfare. And while we may be facing a savage enemy that has no problems blowing up schools and cutting the throats of women and children, we cannot go there as Americans ever.
Yeah, absolutely. There are the greatest torchbearers, I think, of American ethics and what we're all about are the troops. They're the first in battle and the first that the civilian population sees. That flag on the shoulder means a lot, and it represents something to the civilian mind that we don't always realize. But it's sort of the distillation of what other people believe is the United States of America.
Yeah.
And what the soldiers and the Marines and the grunts are really all about. We're not bringing combat to this foreign civilian population as much as we're bringing the United States of America to that population.
Yeah.
And it's all the more important that the soldiers and Marines recognize that and act as the best possible symbols of what we think and hope that we're all about. We can't take liberties with the civilian population because that just demeans what we are as an organization and as a country. And leadership at all levels, particularly the small unit level, has to be very mindful of that, because in most cases, there's no leadership above them when there are opportunities to do bad. And we saw with the SEAL case recently, how things can turn ugly in a hurry. The unit has to suppress its maybe visceral emotions at the moment and just do what they know is right. Because if you don't, then you're demeaning everything we stand for and what the rest of your organization stands for.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And I think I want to get your thoughts on this. I mean, I think we go into other countries and the local populace has often been mistreated by the enemy we're facing. And I think they will understand and tolerate, if that's the word I'll use, populations, Iraqis, Afghans, civilians will understand that we made a mistake and inadvertently dropped a bomb where it shouldn't have been. It killed some civilians. They'll understand that. They won't like it, but they'll understand it. But the minute American forces intentionally target non-combatants, I mean, we could put 10 more divisions of ground troops in there. We just lost the war. We lost the battle because now we've got everybody working against us. I would like to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely correct. It's amazing. I've been in several different locations and wars where we've had civilian casualties, and they all do understand that shit happens, and that mistakes are made, but they're not mistakes of intention, and so they're forgiven. But like you say, if there's a troop that suddenly decides he wants to go, sniping and takes out Ahmed's wife, then that's a totally different situation. That guy just cost you a brigade's worth of infantry with what he did. The other part of that you haven't mentioned, but I would, because it's a bone that I've seen in both Iraq and Afghanistan, is the impulse that the higher command has when a mistake is made to wreak retribution and relief and very negative impact on the unit, which is something that may have been just an inadvertent mistake. Stuff happens, and the senior leadership has to have the sense of confidence that it was a mistake, and that the worst thing they can come do is fly in and flog all the leadership for something that was probably generally unavoidable. Sure, do a systems check, see where it went wrong, try to do it better, but don't pick on the poor guy that just happened to send in the grid that the bomb went off on because that's the best information he had at the time. He doesn't need to be flown back to, Abu Ghraib or something. He just needs to be told, hey, do better next time, Jack. And Jack will give you 110% after that. If you don't do a more, call it a lack of if you have a lack of retribution policy, you will get 110% more out of your people in the next time around than this time. If you start firing people left and right, everybody's going to freeze. They're just not going to do anything. And that's going to be even worse. And it's going to be a self-imposed punishment rather than something the enemy imposed on you.
Yeah, agreed. General Davis fired battalion commanders for not being aggressive enough and not using combined arms and prepping objectives. And I hear you, Colonel. I mean, I think I think we've gone overboard on that. The immediate firing or relief or punishment of someone who commands or leads a unit, and at some level they made a mistake. Well, all you've done now is injected a level of timidity and hesitance in those units. And once you take a few pounds of aggressiveness off of a combat soldier or a combat unit, you're gonna have a hell of a lot more friendly casualties now because they're more afraid of higher headquarters than they are of the enemy.
Well, it's the zero defects mentality.
Yeah.
I have no time for zero defects under any circumstance, simply because we're all humans and stuff is going to happen. It's going to be 90% inadvertent, 10% stupidity. Take care of the 10%, but don't punish the 90%. Troops are very perceptive. And if they see that, their platoon leader, company commander, battalion commander got sacked for an act that they kind of know was probably unavoidable. They're not going to give anything in a positive way. They're going to hang back. They're going to be much less risk more risk avoidance. And a result of that, the risks are going to be even greater. That's the equation people don't understand.
Yeah.
In combat, if you play risk avoidance, you're really greatly multiplying the probability of risk to your own people. A little bit of aggressiveness at the point of conflict, is worth just pounds of future timidity.
No doubt about it. Colonel, our time is winding down. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or talk about or touch upon?
Again, I just want to go back to where we were originally. The most important element in any combat organization is a small unit. The least experienced and the least trained of any of our leadership, simply because of time. The more emphasis that can be given to that, the better. I have a great concern today about technology in that it removes the human aspects of leadership. Some indeterminate voice 300 miles to the rear is suddenly directing the first squad and where to maneuver around the building.
Yeah.
Troops don't relate to a voice, they relate to a person. And all this technology gives some personalities the feeling that they can lead in combat from afar. And they'll be much more capable of applying combat leadership because they can see the big picture. But what they can't see is the guy that's actually doing the work on the ground. The guy on the ground wants to see, feel, and smell the person that's sending him to death. And they better have a positive feeling about that. They don't get that from a computer, or an iPad, or a SATCOM. They only get it from looking at the guy in the face, and the guy says, go here and do that. They'll do that, but they understand who's doing it for them, not the technological voice, coming from afar. That's my really great concern now about our wonderful technology, is that it's eroding what's really important in terms of human combat leadership.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what you're saying, what I'm saying to dovetail on that, is that the technology that's available today is incredible. I think a brigade commander can probably watch squads assaulting a building. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as he doesn't interfere inappropriately. However, if the leadership style is such that it is being micromanaged from above, what they are forgetting is Murphy's Law, because those systems are going to go out inevitably. And now you've got troops trained only to move and act when the spooky voice from above comes over their headsets, and now it's not coming anymore. And the direction can't come, and the higher commander can't see anymore. So we're back to 1944 again, with sergeants and lieutenants in the dark, operating, and what your commander just said, just do it. Yeah.
Technology allows a commander to see the battlefield, but more importantly, it allows him to bring assets to the battlefield.
Right.
What's appropriate for this particular situation in, Block 6 in Fallujah? He can see that, and he can turn around to his people with all of their resources and bring it in to first squad, first platoon. He shouldn't run first squad, first platoon, but boy, he ought to bring everything to them he can, because he now can see what they need and bring it to them.
Yeah.
Mustering the assets and the resources with technology is great. Trying to lead with that technology is bad.
Yeah, agreed. And that's been evidenced on several occasions in Iraq and Afghanistan and some other contingencies. You know, one thing I always stress to the young folks, and I know you agree with, Colonel, is the value of mentors. And I always tell the young guys, you got to grab some mentors. And, you know, you named a couple, you know, Gavin and Ridgway. I mean, that's pretty good, you know, if you had interaction with them. So my first is, do you agree that it's important for these young folks to go out and seek a mentor? And secondly, are there any mentors in your past that you would like to single out that had a real effect on young Lieutenant Nightingale?
Answer, yes. It's really important if a troop can get mentored by somebody that's been there before. You know, there's no point in learning on the battlefield, which you might have learned earlier.
Right.
And, you know, that was, I keep going back to the old 82nd vets that I saw as a second lieutenant wandering through the area. And yet, looking back on it, was incredibly valuable because they reinforced points that I thought intuitively were right and what was wrong. And you learned from them, and it just reinforced. Also, they provide an example. I mean, you know, you knew, even though they were 20 years out of the Army, if Ridgway or Gavin told you to do something, you were going to do it because you believed in them. You could see their personality, and you could see why people gravitated to their leadership style. You know, who's not mentioned that was a mentor of me that I didn't know he was a mentor until after. Platoon Sergeant Ernst was a platoon sergeant in B Company 2505, where I was a second lieutenant platoon leader for all 3 rifle platoons. He was one of them. One evening, the very first time we were in the field, he took me through our field position. And he said, just follow me and watch what I do. With a little background on Ernst. Ernst was in the Wehrmacht in World War II. He was a NCO in the German Army. And he joined the U.S. Army actually joined the 82nd in Germany when it was the honor guard in Berlin, because it was a means for quick citizenship. And he and a number of other German ex-Wehrmacht were in the 82nd, and he was one of them. And he was a central casting Nazi. I mean, square cut, blonde hair, blue eyes, the whole bit, extremely professional. And, you know, his point was to teach me how to be a lieutenant and what was important. And he would emphasize, you know, the squad, the platoon sergeant. We went to the field on this first field exercise, and he said, just follow me, in his heavy accent. And he would go to each position and talk to the troops very quietly. What's your left boundary? What's your right boundary? You know, what is the dead zone up ahead? Where is the final protective fire? You know, all these kind of little professional questions. We went through the whole perimeter. He never said a word to me, but he was a tremendous instructor on how to deal with people and things and tactics. And I exactly replicated what he did with me as a captain in the A-Show when I came into my rifle company that had been blown away. Went from about 125 people to like 65. And I was brought in as the emergency company commander. And I could see those guys were totally blown away. I mean, we were in the middle of the A-Show. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We had to get our act together in a hurry. And I just did exactly what Ernst did for me. You know, I walked around to each position. You know, there's no rah-rah speech was going to work at that point with these guys. You know, the bad guy bodies were still all draped over the parapets. And I just walked around with each group of people and asked them the same questions Ernst asked me, or told them, demonstrated to me. And I look at what he did and, you know, in other circumstances also in the division, and it was incredibly valuable. You know, it just, you know, mentally, emotionally, and professionally, what Ernst did, you know, carried me through a very difficult time. Yeah. And that was some obscure platoon sergeant who probably retired to be a a prison guard in Fayetteville or something.
Yeah.
But he's more valuable to me than he ever knows.
Well, if you had, I always ask this question as a wrap up, Colonel, if you had the ability to bring one combat leader back from the past, spend a day with them, who would you choose?
Ben Vandervoort, wartime battalion commander of the 2505, my original unit. I got to know him pretty well. Ridgway told me that he thought that Vandervoort was the best combat battalion commander in the European theater, bar none. And Gavin also had a very high opinion of him. He was very quiet, not demonstrative, had no ego about him, super businesslike. I mean, you ask him a question, he's going to answer the question, bang, 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 bang. And he saw everything from the original deployment of the division to North Africa, all the way through the Battle of the Bulge. And every troop that I talked to, a vet that was in the unit, absolutely adored the guy. And, it wasn't anything, he didn't have an effusive personality. He wasn't a chesty puller kind of guy. He wasn't a yeller and screamer, but really knew his job and saw everything and was not afraid to take good calculated risks. At the same time, he never did anything stupid. And so, he's the one guy that I would want to spend a day with, not only because he was a great soldier, but he's just a good person. Yeah. You learn to recognize those. Yeah. And, he was a great soldier and at least as great a person, I think.
Yeah, we've all got those in our past, and we often wonder, if we want to be like them when we grow up, except I'm already 63 years old, and so.
Well, you're way behind me.
Well, I hear you. I just, I hear you. It's all relative. But Colonel, what are you doing these days? Is there anything you're involved with that you want to let us know about? Any organizations or things that you'd like to point us to?
Well, I am providing some assistance to CG ForceCom on the SFAB, the advisory programs.
Okay.
And how to put that together based on, my experience in Vietnam. I've written a couple of books, all available on Amazon. Buy them by the case. They're great stocking stuffers. I have one on a battle in Vietnam, the one I mentioned where we were overrun. Another one on basically essays I've written over time, covering everything from Normandy through my various personal experiences, trying to explain to the 99% what the 1% does for them. Grunt them 101, if you would. And there's one coming out in August on the Iran Rescue Program, the day journal that I kept while I was on the JTF staff, and then the transition to the building of the SOF forces that I was very heavily involved in. Task Force 160, Delta, the Rangers, ISA, all of that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm here in Ojai growing limes and killing gophers.
Nice. Well, for the listeners out there, I do encourage you to read Colonel Nightingale's books, and he is a prolific author. If you just type in a Google search of Keith Nightingale, you're going to find more great combat-oriented reading than you could possibly do in a few weeks straight. And I just want to let you know, Colonel, I read your stuff that you put on Facebook. I read all the articles that you've teased us with on the Iran mission and all of that. So I don't know how much feedback you get, but I mean, every time I see your name pop up, I read the article or I mark it.
Thank
so
you.
I read it later that night. You're an exceptional author whose credibility and experience is unquestioned. And with that, I'd just like to thank you so much for showing up on the podcast. I think this episode is going to be very well received, and we'd love to have you back at some point.
Yeah, well, it's certainly my pleasure. The most important thing is that it is useful for your audience. I visualize you've got some Lance Corporal listening to this, and 2-3 years from now in a very dark place, he'll remember something we said and it'll make a difference.
Absolutely. It's the whole genesis of this podcast. We can't do it, all else being equal, they're going to listen to your experiences before they listen to mine. And I'm okay with that. I'm happy to be the organizer.
Well, collectively, hopefully we make a good difference.
I'll take it. With that, we are rounds complete for this podcast. Colonel, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at combatleadership.com. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient philosopher Plato. Only the dead have seen the end of war.